Hi, this is Kim Pinkney, and I'm going to be drawing on a t-shirt using Crayola fabric line markers, and I'll give you my final thoughts on that when I'm done. On the back, I noticed that there's no brown, and these markers have to be heat setted. And usually, what I do to heat set is pretty much throw it into a dryer. But I'll give you a review on that, and I'll be drawing using one of Crayola's Art Edge Sugar Skulls book. Art with Edge, pardon me. And it's got 40 pages. Very bold images. I didn't care for all of them, so I chose the one that stood out the most to me and I thought would look really awesome on a shirt, and that's this one. This is what it's going to look like when I'm done, and I'll give you a step-by-step on how I do this. Alright, first off, I noticed that it's perforated edges, which is awesome. So I start to fold it over and cut it out. Now, I like using these type of books as inspiration, so I want to protect this picture. So what I'm going to be doing is putting it into a plastic sleeve. That way the markers don't bleed through to the image. I wanted to use nothing but Crayola products on this. I just wanted to give it a fair evaluation, better than what some people have done. Some have just showed the box, some have used it, but I want to try to push it a little bit further. And here we go, and that should be sufficient. What I'm going to be using are embroidery hoops, two different sizes. I'm going to be using Gildan t-shirt, white t-shirt. This is a 2X, so maybe I might want to squeeze into this bad boy, or if someone feels froggy, maybe they might want to take it off my hands. I'm also going to probably do a couple more sugar skulls on there from the book, just to give this a really great review. This is one of the embroidery hoops. It's not my favorite because it doesn't have it doesn't have a lip to really hold it in place. So to basically use it, you want to insert the inside part in and then hold it in place with the outside. A lot of people use like a book underneath or some papers underneath. I prefer to, when I'm using fabric markers, to use the embroidery hoop. I get a really good grip with most of my hoops. This one I'll end up using some clips to try to keep it in place. I want to try to center it so that my image is pretty much, where I want it to sit on the chest. Since this shirt is so huge, I have plenty of room to add other things to it. I'm not so worried about it being ironed because the space that I will be using, it's going to be smoothed out, and you'll see that in a sec. So once you get the center part centered, you'll want to take the outside part and put that over that part, and that's what seals it into place. So here's the tough part, is trying to get it centered in such a small area that I have here. And I'm trying to get like maybe an inch or so from the top. Any larger than that, because the image is going to be probably about 3 fingers down once I start to use the embroidery hoop. Once the hoop is in place, I kind of center it where the top is, the top of the image, and I'll start to pull the shirt taut. You see how I don't really care about how wrinkled it is? You pull it just tight enough. You don't want to pull it too tight, because if you do, it'll distort the image once you take it off. So just enough to keep it in place. Not enough to bounce a quarter off of, but just enough to keep it in place. Down below you see my table. I have a glass table, and I have a lamp underneath. And what I'm going to do is take the image that I just pulled out of the book, and I'm going to set that into in between the t-shirt and the table. Now, even without the light, you can still see vaguely the image. but I really want to get a good copy so I can just emulate what I see here. Usually I would just draw my own image, but I really wanted to use some Crayola products to do this. Now what I'm doing is I'm basically moving the shirt from the center so that I can get a really good light beneath from the table. And I don't want to get the fabric marker onto the rest of the shirt, so this is what I'm doing with this. I have a clipboard that is it's clear, so that doesn't interrupt the light at all either. And I got that from a dollar store for like $2. These hoops are inexpensive as well. The second hoop that I got from Walmart for like $2. The fabric markers themselves, they were 50% off at my Michael's store. So I invested in that, and also, well, Crayola products were 50% off, so I bought both that and the book. Alright, so now I just want to arrange the picture so that it's moderately centered. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's nice to have it centered. And the clipboard beneath just gives us a little bit more stability. And you can use any light source in order to capture the image. Or you don't need one at all, depending on how tight you make the shirt. Now this is really flimsy. This wood, the bigger it is, the more flimsy it is. So I have tightened it as tight as I could at the very top, but I actually need some hooks. So I put some clips on these sides so that it would stay in place. And I decided to use the black fabric marker first. And I'm going very slowly. Now the flow of this is pretty good. Unlike the, what is it called? The stained by Sharpie fabric marker, it doesn't flow really fast, so I could go as slow as I wanted to without having to lift up or it bleeding. So this was a really good set of markers, despite not having a brown with this set. The tip was nice and thin enough to accomplish some of these lines, but once I got to the finer lines with the there's some like beads that are holding a skull at the bottom. Once I got to that point, I had to improvise and make the circles as small as I could with the tip that I had. So that's the one downside. As fine as these tips are, they're not that fine. They're not like 0.5 or anything like that fine. Also, I took a few liberties since this is going to be my shirt. And as you will when you color anything, like a coloring book and whatnot, you're putting your own little stamp of things on there. So I add a little something to the eyes. The eyelashes, I have a problem with them being straight out, so I make them kind of like a curved shape. And also, tracing is not always my thing, so especially when it's somebody else's work. So I went ahead and I took some liberties with that. You'll find that in a lot of these coloring books that the lines are very, very thick. And when it comes to coloring, I don't really, it's not my thing to have such a thick line. So I stick with the thickness that is already on the marker itself. And you see here's where I'm curving the eyelashes. And actually giving it like a little teardrop shape with the with the eye duct, and then making the eye just a little bit rounder, just for my own personal taste. However you decide to do your image, it's up to you. You can add whatever designs you want on your sugar skull. You can color it any way you want. I noticed that a lot of the lines that I was tracing, uh, they were a little bit wonky. They weren't quite centered, and that's fine. It just adds to some of the cuteness of it. On the box itself, it also says to point the uh, the marker downwards so that you get that fine tip. And what I end up using are the sides of it once I start to color. Right now I'm just using the tip, and it's a really good point. It seems to dry pretty fast. The light itself that's beneath the table is warming things up a little bit too. So I start to speed up just a little bit. Now some of these things, if you decide to do your own coloring book transfer onto a t-shirt, some of the things you want to keep in mind are how it ends. Like at the very bottom, this ends with no border. It's just like just trails off, and you got to figure out what you're going to do. Some of them are cut off and things like that, and that's when you can start getting a little bit more creative and adding your own little twist. On some of the swirls on the design, I add more curved, swirly look to it than the original design. And again, once you do your own image, you want to add your own flavor to it. Just personalizes a little bit more. See some of my observations with the marker itself. It's easy to hold. The cap stays on relatively well on the end, so I didn't lose the cap as often. And it flows pretty well. I wasn't so concerned that it was going to be deep dark, almost like um, like a felt call it a magic marker, like a stain by like a Sharpie. I didn't expect it to be completely utterly black, but it did what it has to do. Now also, when you do outlines, you don't have to use the marker itself. If you're like doing lines that you're going to cover up with the markers itself, you can use the Crayola colored pencils. I was going to use the colored pencil on this, but it took longer to do it, and the colored pencil is going to wash out, so there would be no worries as far as that's staying in. So that's also a nice alternative that you can go with. A lot of the Crayola products are washable. Now what you're seeing here is I did speed this up about a lot because I was going really slow. I just wanted to make sure that my lines were all there and detailed. I started with the eyes first because if the eyes are off and you jump around and you try to do something else, it's going to come out kind of weird sometimes. So I start with the things that matter the most, which was the eyes and the face, and then I branch out to the hair and the hands and whatnot. When you're tracing, just be very careful that you're not overlapping your lines in the wrong places, and you should be doing okay. And again, on some of the swirls, I just added a little bit more of a little drop shape and things like that, just to make it a little bit more interesting to me. And you'll see that it's not completely symmetrical, and that's okay. And again, you don't have to draw exactly, what you see. Once you get the initial image down, you can always change it up. Now, also, I was looking at the markers themselves, and I noticed that they didn't have a peach tone. They didn't have, and they won't. There's only 10 colors. You have red, a pink, or more magenta look, a red and orange. Let's see, I said red, magenta, orange, yellow, green, uh, blue, a light blue, pink. I'm sorry, not pink. It's like a purplish color, gray, and black. I would have preferred to have a brown instead of gray, but we get what we get. If I can, I want to try to get the set that does have the brown. It doesn't come in the fine line, it appears, but I'll take what I can get. Brown would have been very helpful for skin tone. Now I'm kind of pressing down so that I can see the image underneath. With the the hoops, it gives it a bit of a space away from the image itself. It's made for embroidery, so if you ever if you have a concern about it bleeding through or whatnot like that, as long as the shirt is hanging underneath, like the back part of the shirt is hanging underneath, you're not going to mess it up. These did dry relatively at a good pace. They dried at a good pace. So now I'm pretty much doing the hair and the flowers. And I apologize if it's cut off. But I'll definitely be bringing it down further so that you can see the entire image. Now for all of this, all I had to do was one pass. So the black marker is pretty good. It didn't catch on anything, and it flowed right across the t-shirt. So I really had no complaints about how the flow was. Now also the box says to cap the fabric markers often, that way they don't dry out on you. So I try to keep up with that. With like Copic markers, you can leave the cap off for a bit, but with these, you definitely want to cap them back. So I end up doing that. The flowers had a lot of detail in them, and some of it was hard to see, but I think I made do. They look like flowers. Now, one of the things I didn't think about when I was outlining this is that I had to think about which colors I was going to color everything. And one of the go-to colors that I wanted to do was brown. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't have a brown. And I didn't want to use black because I'm outlining in black. So I had to improvise, and I wanted to test how well these colors blended and mixed with each other. And I found that the best way to blend your colors is to do it while it's wet. Don't wait for it to dry. Go ahead and get them there while it's wet to get them to change colors, like yellow and blue would make green, things like that. And I found that I would have to do multiple layers of color in order to get it to get to a brownish color. If you've seen any of my other videos when it comes to using or mixing the stained by Sharpie markers, you'll notice that green is one of my favorite go-to colors for the skin. Laying down a base of green and then using orange really seems to do the trick, especially with these as well. I discovered that later. As I was waiting for this to dry, I did a few little swatches of layered colors and just did like maybe a little bit of orange and then threw green on it and then threw blue on it just to see what kind of tones I could get, so that when I do the next image with these markers, that I'd have a variety. So one of my videos, I think I'll show you how to blend some colors and to get a nice mixture. That way you don't feel hobbled if you don't have certain colors, like brown. Brown and orange make a really nice skin tone, but without having brown, it's kind of hard to really check. I used orange and yellow together and red and things like that, and I got more of a sunset color, and I couldn't find anybody that would match that. I couldn't make peach because it's like I couldn't lighten it up. So what I ended up doing is just doing a whole bunch of different swatches on some scrap fabric, and came up with like just layering it. I'd lay down blue, then go over it quickly with orange, and then blue again and got a nice brown, things like that. Outlined it with green and then went over it with a yellow and then red and then yellow again, and I got a brown tone. And so I just went on and did things like that. And each layer that I would do, that way I didn't forget what colors I used, I just went ahead and did it that way. So anyway, right now I am getting close to the end of the outlining stage. Depending on how intricate your picture is, it could take from 5 to 10 minutes, maybe longer, depending on how detailed it is, how much detail you want to put in. I'm going to do a speed drawing with some music, and that way it's not so tedious. But this is step by step here. So pretty much just inking. And the entire time I kept the pen pretty much straight so I could only use the tip. And I noticed that as I was touching places that I had already touched, that I had already done, it was already dry. And that's probably partially because of the light that was on it. But with just using like one marker on it, it dried pretty fast. It didn't smear when I touched it with my hand, so that was a good thing. Now I do try to use other blending techniques. I tried to use a blending stub, and then I tried to use maybe like trying to get the I wanted to lighten it up. I didn't want to go ahead and just have like the stain by Sharpie. It comes right on out at you, and I didn't have any dried up fabric markers of the Crayola brand, so I didn't want to throw anybody off by using like a dried up marker of some other sort. Okay, I just kicked it into time lapse here. Okay, now here I am just going through and filling in some of the dark spots. Alrighty, and I noticed that when I put it on its side, it started to do a little blending. Okay, now I tried to use a paintbrush with a little bit, well, without water first, and it dried up on me. So that didn't work. So I tried it again with a blending stub, and it came out really soft. It mostly stayed on the brush or the stub. So I'm like, okay, let me just go for it. So I tried using putting it down, making it wet, and then rubbing it in, and it still wasn't moving. So I'm like, okay, let's just go for it. See, I tried it again and again, and it still wasn't moving. I wasn't getting like gradients. So I'm like, okay, so we're just gonna have to work with it. So I started adding some swirls, started to color it in a little bit. Still not sure what colors I really want to use. So I just started doing some little outlines and whatnot. So I wanted the eye socket and the nose to be a little bit red going into black to gray. And I tried to get a little gradient going again, and it came out kind of pink. But one of the cool things I noticed that as it dries to a certain color. So I'm like, okay, alright, if I want to make it darker, add another layer to it. So I did that, and then I would just keep doing that. So I would see how it would dry, and I just add another layer to it, and it got darker and darker. So now I'm just adding some random designs. Some designs I found from other sugar skulls. Okay, so I wanted to try to make I wanted to see what kind of gradients I could make. Do the colors blend? Do they mix? And so I started adding the red, and when I added the touch of red again, it got a little darker. And you see it dries a little light. So you want to use multiple layers of color. Let it dry a little bit, and then add another layer. If you're trying to get like a deeper, darker red, you might want to use like a blue underneath. I'd suggest using a brown, but there is no brown. Or just try to use your complementary colors, like the opposite color on the color wheel. So what I used was blue and made a deeper, darker red, almost to black. And here's where I'm using the blue, and I'm like, oh, look at it, it's getting deeper and darker. So wherever I wanted it to have like a bit of a shadow, I would add that in there. And then I'd go back over with the red, and I'm like, I really like this. And then I started to notice that it was starting to turn brown, and I'm like, huh, so this is how I get brown. You can see that in the farthest right flower. So I start to play with it a little bit, and I start to bring it into the hair. But basically this is what I'm doing, is just going over with blue and red, and just making the colors just a little bit deeper, a little bit darker. And then as they dry, because it'll dry into a lighter tone of red, I add another bit of blue, a little bit of orange, and then I get a little bit of brown to it. It just starts to turn brown. And I'm like, I need a little bit deeper, darker brown. So I started adding blue on top of red, on top of orange, and started adding that in there. And then there's our red again, using blue in the deepest, darkest parts. And then leaving just a little bit of an area for like highlights. Since you don't have a white marker or anything like that to give you white, you gotta think ahead as far as doing highlights. So I'm just going over and over again with red, orange, and blue. And then I'll make, with the thin tip of the marker, I would make little strands, just to give it some variety. And I just keep continuing to do that until I get the colors that I kind of like. And it just comes out gorgeous. I'm like, this is really getting pretty. Now, when you're using blue, you got to be careful if you're going to use like yellow as a highlight, because you don't want it to turn green on you. So you might want to wait a little bit to let it dry a bit. And then I kept going back over any of the parts that were just too pinkish or not deep or dark or red enough. Alrighty. So here I am again. I'm finishing it up here. And basically what I'm doing is just going over with blue just to give it that darker tone. And it looks like it didn't catch my doing the face. What I'm doing is I'm using the side of the marker, not the tip. And I just very, very lightly, just one sweep, I went and did the cheekbones. I did a sweep of the eye socket, and I just kind of tried to get the red and the blue to go together. And I'm doing that in the hair. I had taken a break and just tried using, trying to combine different colors. So I lay down some blue, and while it's still wet, I tried putting a little bit of orange down, a little bit of red down, just to see how I can get the brown look going. And they cover each other pretty well. So if you don't like the way that it's, you think it may be drying too lightly, just add either another coat once it dries, or add another color beneath it, like blue or green, and you'll be surprised at the results. It's really pretty.
I wolfed it down quite quickly.
I've also added yellow around where I believe the highlights would be. And then, because the hair just cuts off at the very bottom there, I just had it trail off a little bit. I just added some swirls and stuff, just so that it doesn't just abruptly end. One of the ideas I'm thinking of is going through one of the other sugar skulls that they have in there, and they have little patterns and designs that I might want to put around this character. With a dinner and elite cocktails at one of New York's hottest restaurants for 12 people. Now, if I wanted it to be more of a reddish brown, I'd just go over it more with red. If I wanted it to be more of an orangish brown, I'd just go over it with more orange. Or if I just needed it to be just a little bit darker, I'd do both colors with the blue.
After being suppressed for the past couple calendars, this is the rebirth of Jenny's. Oh my gosh, thank you. Yep, great job. You're both in. You can go at night.
Yeah, I do like this product. I wish it did have the brown in it. I wouldn't have to work so hard. But on the whole, it's pretty good. I don't like that I have to heat set it, but it is what it is. The tip is nice. The marker part is nice. It does come down pretty easy, and I can really just grind the color into it with the yellow to get things to blend and change color. I can push down on it and not worry about the tip being permanently stained, because I noticed that you'll notice that if you go over some of the colors to get it to change, you'll see some of the other marker on there, and it's not a problem, because once you start to either rub it off or rub it in a different place, it doesn't keep the color. So your markers aren't ruined like if you use the Stain by Sharpie or one of the other brands that I usually use. Your tip is permanently stained, and then you're kind of flying blind on what's going to come out of it. So I didn't have that problem with this.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I promise I won't make that again.
The coloring book itself, it didn't have enough of the pictures that I really, really liked. I found maybe 2 or 3 that I liked, and then others, they were kind of like an inspiration. Some of them were kind of quirky, which is really awesome, and some were just so macabre that I'm like, okay, I don't think so. But this one turned out really cute, and it looks great on a shirt. Now, at no time did I end up using black on the hair. This is all just blue, gray. I just added gray at the end. Um, Black is only used on the outline. And it's just all orange and red and blue for the most part. Now, in order to get that gradient, that weird gradient, I had everywhere where it bent downward, I added like the darker color, and everywhere it bent, where you would see a bend, I left that with the highlight, and as it got away from that bend, I started to go a little darker. Darker around the head, coming outwards from the face, and just alternating adding red, and then alternating adding some lines. But on the most, as I'm coloring it, I'm using the side of it, and it does a pretty good job. The next time I do laundry, I'm going to heat set it, and I should be done. But it also gives me a chance to add more images to this. So maybe I might add another image from the coloring book. But I urge you to check it out. If you are interested in drawing sugar skulls, or would like to see some different take on sugar skulls, there's a big variety in there. Again, I only really cared about maybe 3 of them. And I asked my son, he totally picked one that was completely different. But a lot of them were quirky, and they might give you some inspiration if you want to draw that onto a shirt. One of my sons liked, there was one in there with a bear, with a fish in its mouth. And the only thing he didn't like about it was the skull on top of it, but other than that, he gave us a chuckle. So it's a fun book. So would I recommend these markers to anyone? Oh, absolutely. I mean, look at the results. I mean, you can really get some really good results with this. And even after doing this image, I still had plenty of marker left to do another one if I wanted to. Okay, for the skin, I just used the blue, and I used the gray, and I went over it just lightly. I went all the way back on the marker. Right now I'm like right up on it to control it, but if I'm doing a really soft touch to it, my hand is way on the end of the marker, barely like, you see where those 2 lines are? On the, my hand would be like way back there. My fingers would be holding it way back there. That way I have the very lightest touch for it to go across the image. And that's how I got the shadows around the cheekbones. And I also did the same thing around the fingers and the hand. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this shirt. I'll probably just be adding a few little lines and stuff like that. I decorate the look. I didn't have any like ideas on what I wanted to do, and again, the tip is it's not that fine, so I couldn't really get really deep dark, really tiny details onto the skull, so I had to pretty much improvise. And you can tell around the circles on the fingertips with the chain. I couldn't get much smaller than that without it just coloring itself in. Alrighty, well, thank you for watching, And I am Kim Pinkney, and if you have any questions or if you have any suggestions, just let me know in the comments. If you don't like the video, let me know why you don't like it. If you need me to slow down, if you need me to explain something a little bit better, just let me know before you poo-poo it away. But yeah, you can really get away with some really great coloring tricks and stuff. So hopefully maybe I'll come up with a video on how to get these different colors, to get the brown and the sunset skin, maybe on the next one that I do. Alrighty, so if you like what you see, please like and subscribe, and hopefully there'll be more videos like this in the future. If there's a different type of video that brought you here, please let me know what you'd like to see, okay? Alrighty, so have a great one, and again, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.
Inside the book that I wrote, all the words that we spoke, yet only with our eyes. Now is the time to